Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. I'm really excited to share today's interview with you with Karl Hambsch, the owner of Loving Cup Winery and Vineyards in Virginia. Here's what's special about Karl and Loving Cup. It is the only certified organic winery in Virginia and one of less than a handful of certified organic wineries on the entire East Coast. What he's doing has enormous risk to it, and here's another hint about how he's making it happen. It's not easy. It is difficult work, and it comes from a place of deep caring about the importance of being organic. Why else would you put in the kind of work that Karl has to put into, as you'll hear? What's amazing about it, though, is Karl is eliminating excuses that anyone else might have in anywhere else in the world about growing organically. Because if you can grow organically in Virginia and be successful at making delicious wine there, you can really do it anywhere. It is one of the worst places in terms of disease pressure, fungus pressure, insect pressure, all of the things that compete with grapevines and make it difficult to grow them. He has to face on a daily basis. And then there are years when it rains 100 inches or more during the growing season, or they get a freeze on Mother's Day, which decimates 80% of the vineyard. We cover how he actually does this. What are the specific processes and techniques he uses to make organic work in Virginia? We talk about hybrids, and we talk about the future of viticulture in America, which I think he's trailblazing. Karl is one of my heroes solely because of the bravery and perseverance that he demonstrates in making organic viticulture work where he is, and the risks that he's taking to do it. So I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I do, and I know that you will get a ton of great information. If anybody is growing organically or wants to grow organically east of the Rockies, as Karl says in the interview, please contact him because he's both a valuable resource and somebody who would love to share knowledge and information with anybody else who's doing it. One other heads up about this interview is that there are some audio issues. We conducted this interview in the lead up to, and we were interrupted by a large lightning storm. So I think it caused some connection issues, which when we put the interview together, my audio falls out at certain times when I'm asking questions. His is a little pixelated at times. Nothing terrible. We've cleaned it up as much as possible, but bear with us as we deal with the realities of connecting across the continent during a lightning storm. So let's dig in. The sponsor for today's episode is Centralis Wine. That's Centralas Wine. You can learn more about Centralis at centraliswine.com. And full disclosure, Centralis is my winery. I started Centralis because I noticed a disconnect between the values that many wine drinkers have and the kinds of wine they choose to drink. I wanted to give those of you who love wine an option to buy wine that reflects your values. So Centralis is built on two pillars. The first is that Centralis wine will always be made with, at minimum, organically grown grapes. And the second is that we will always tell you every ingredient that was added during winemaking. Our first vintage will be released very soon. In fact, it may be available by the time you hear this. And it's pretty limited, so if you want to get some, please go to our website, centraliswine.com, and sign up for our wine list. Or go ahead and buy wine. That's Centralas wine.com. We're also on Instagram at centraliswine, and I can't wait to share our wines with you. Well, Karl, thank you for joining me for this, and I want to welcome you to the Organic Wine Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Absolutely. No, it's great to talk to you again. Every time we talk, I feel like I learn something new, and, I'm a big fan. I think we'll dig into some of the juicy stuff in this, but I'll just tease it by saying I think what you're doing is really remarkable and can offer a lot of great helpful stuff for people doing wine, viticulture of various kinds across the country, around the world. So, but let's set it up a little bit. I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about Loving Cup and where you're located.
All right, so we're in Central Virginia, just south of Charlottesville. So the AVA is called Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home.
Sure.
Um, the Monticello wine region has 35, maybe. So it's not Napa, but it's one of the more uh, densely packed AVAs in Virginia. I think we're up to 9 AVAs now, so it's not California, but we are sort of on the southwestern edge of that AVA.
Great. And the winery is called Loving Cup. Tell us a little bit about what's unique about Loving Cup.
Right. So we are the only certified organic vineyard and certified organic winery in Virginia. And there are only a handful of us on the East Coast. There's one up in Vermont. There's one in North Carolina. I mean, there is a possibility that others might have slipped past my notice, but I'm only aware of us three on the East Coast. So that makes us unique for Virginia. I wish we had company, and we did. There were two other organic vineyards in Virginia, but now we're the only one.
There's an attrition rate to organic vineyards, it sounds like, on the East Coast.
Yeah, well, I half expected that we would be we would have found the end of our story at some point because we've been doing this maybe like 11, 12 years, something like that. I don't know. And when you do something that's inherently unstable, like spinning plates or something, you just expect that at some point you're going to catch a bad break or lose focus or something, and everything's going to come crashing down. So in that regards, we're fairly lucky to have um, lasted longer than I expected us to.
Okay. Well, I mean, when we get into some of what you've had to deal with, I don't know how many people would agree with you that you've been lucky, but it sounds like at least you've been stalwart.
There you
Um,
go.
I was gonna compare, the organic wineries on the East Coast to an exclusive club, but it sounds more like an endangered species. Might be more accurate. Um, but let's start a little further back. Why did you get into wine?
Whew. Um, I like many of us, like we just goofed around with wine, goofed around with
Hmm.
fruit. Um, Dad and mom had like a garden growing up, and it used to be just a vegetable garden, and organic by default. Just out of neglect. You plant them, you pull weeds every once in a while, and then you harvest. Um, and then
Right.
after I left for college, I think they started playing with fruit and raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, and we just started making wine from that fruit, and it was as you know, there's something super engaging about fermentation, and
Yeah.
it's the bubbles and the smells,
Hmm.
and it makes you happy. And then you also know that it's going to make other people happy once it's all done. And there's just something fairly um, joyful about making wine from the fruit that you grew. And that's sort of how we got into winemaking, but had no grand plans for having a commercial winery, but I worked for other vineyards and wineries prior to us starting our own vineyard and winery. But what's your question about?
Well, just how you got into wine. What excited you to make you cross that threshold into this is going to be a commercial venture and we're going to start investing time and space on the farm and everything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say that there was like this, Robert Parker epiphany moment, where my life changed when I opened a bottle of wine. But nothing was quite so clear. There was not like a fulcrum, and we decided to
Uh-huh.
to lean over towards the let's do it. It just kind of happened. I mean, it's
So
we put in 100 vines for ourselves. Again, like my folks had this garden, and so we were putting in 100 grapevines just to make wine from for ourselves, and didn't really have any thought about it being organic. Again, we just like didn't want to have to take care of it, or wanted to be able to neglect it and harvest. And since
right.
I knew folks in the industry, I asked and said, so like, how can I do this? And they said, well, you can't because everything wants your roots or your shoots or your grapes, animals, insects, and diseases. And you can't just like, it doesn't matter what varieties. I mean, even wild grapevines, you can't just plant them and walk away from them. So that's how we got involved with this organic concept initially. Was all right. So how can we actually do this without spraying like high powered sprays? Um,
Right.
and
That was going to be my next big question was why organic? So yeah, so that talk a little bit more about that. What you
well,
wanted to
so
avoid those sprays that said people told you were necessary.
yeah, I mean, wild vines. Not all wild varieties are disease resistant, but it, even on very wet years, you can look up at these wild vines and see the leaves like just riddled with anthracnose and black rot, and so no grapevines, even the wild ones, are going to be pristine unless they are sprayed with something. And so we realized that we knew a vineyard consultant, a fairly renowned vineyard consultant, for Central Virginia, and we had known him as an acquaintance for like 20 years. And so we asked him, so what can we do other than just give up on planting these vines for ourselves? And he had suggested that we look into soft sprays and disease resistant varieties. And again, like we had no concept of being certified organic. We were just trying to not cover ourselves in materials that I would feel guilty about being in the washing machine with my wife and my daughter's clothes. And
Right.
so we just did the research and said, well, let's just give it a shot. So we put in 100 vines. And put in some varieties that had just been released and tried as many different of these new materials, these biological materials and botanical materials that were OMRI listed. I mean, that didn't mean anything to me at the time, except that it meant it was, to me, safe. And just, we broke up every row of 25 vines into 8 panels, and a panel is a space between line posts. And then so one panel for each row was a control panel, and then I had 7 different spray programs, which is really annoying, but 7 different spray programs for each of the 4 varieties that we initially planted, because the idea was there wasn't a template. Like I made the notebook, that I gave to this consultant as a proposal. It would have been nice if the notebook was already made and I could just sort of flip through it. So we had to go through and evaluate which varieties might actually work for Virginia, what materials might actually be able to hold off the diseases that we get in the Mid Atlantic, and we just in 2 years we had figured we had learned enough to maybe do it on a larger scale. So those
Hmm.
first 100 vines we planted for ourselves, but by the time we got that all on the ground and had done the research and thought, hey, we might actually have a shot at this, that's when we started thinking about maybe we could do this commercially. Um, and it's hubris to think that you can do something that no one else has done before, but um, you know we did everything in steps so that if we failed after a couple of years, we could have canceled um, uh, the initial vine order for the whole field.
Right.
And then I did all along the way. Then you don't build the building right away in case the whole vineyard in the field fails. You have to all these off ramps that were built into the plan, and so far we haven't had
Wow.
to take any of them. Well, I mean, it's a considerable investment, and
Yeah.
You
Of
know,
course.
there is a reason why there aren't organic vineyards on the East Coast. You can't just assume that no one has thought of this before, right? So going into it knowing there's probably a good reason why they don't exist, had to acknowledge that we were engaging in a fairly risky undertaking, and we're trying to go
Right.
into it with as much humility as possible, but also acknowledging that we didn't know. Um, so that's how we got into an organic vineyard. I mean, it's like I don't think that I proposed the idea to my father. He says I proposed it to him. I recall him proposing it to me. So the origin
It's not-
is unclear.
it sounds like you're trying to figure out who to blame for your current situation.
Yeah, yeah, for the 12 hours a day and 95-degree heat. Um,
Right. That's funny. So, and just to clarify, both your vineyards and your winery are certified organic, right?
yes, yeah, certified separately. It's certified by the same organic certifier, but the USDA NOP National Organic Program NOP, they consider the farm as a producer of the ingredients and the winery as the producer of the end product, the wine. So
Right.
those two entities are considered separate, so they're certified separately.
Right.
Um, so the vineyard got certified in 2012, before our first harvest, and the winery was certified in 2016, and only because we just didn't know how to answer the questions. I mean, it's a 75-page application you have to fill out,
Wow.
and a lot of the questions just didn't make any sense. Because they wanted to know how we were going to make the wine over a year in advance of us harvesting the grapes, and that as like you don't know what exactly you have goals for winemaking, but you don't exactly know what techniques you might employ or what wine making processing aids you might use, because you aren't sure of your final chemistry or the quality of the fruit or any sort of challenges that you might have
Right.
as a result of the growing season. And they wanted to know up front how we were going to make the wine. And I was like, I just don't know how to answer these questions. So it took a few years to figure out how to answer the question in such a way that it was honest, most
Right.
important, uh, and, uh, but also satisfy their need to know what we intended to do. So,
Got it. I mean, since you brought that up, the certification process, is it time and labor and financially intensive, or some of those, two of those three, one of those three?
yeah. I mean, so the in the vineyard, the record keeping is not as onerous as it is in the winery. They are much more concerned about the labeling of something as organic, and that the end product is pure, and that you verify that everything you say you're going to do, you've done. Um,
Right.
so the record keeping in the winery is insane, and
Wow.
every day that we are doing something in the winery, it's like 45 minutes to an hour of paperwork, um,
Wow.
just to record what we've done. And the vineyard, my farm journal, what I do every single day outside, what insects I see, if I spray anything, all of that I'm going to do anyway. And so the burden of record keeping is not that bad in the vineyard. The what was the other one you said?
You
Financial?
said that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it costs money for sure. It's we're in a state. I don't know how many states do this, but we're in a state that has that administers the cost share program, the organic cost share. So it's up to 75%, or 75% up to $1,000, $750 or something like that. I don't know. It's a substantial amount of money that they will pay us back. So we pay the money up front, and then we submit the invoices, and they give us a reimbursement. So
Oh.
I
That's
mean,
great. I think there is some tax incentive in California or something similar to that as well
yeah,
that I've heard about.
and that's the most common thing I hear when folks are talking about why, like particularly like small farms in our area, why they don't want to get certified is because of the expense. And I mean, I can't speak to that. All I know is that if you spend $1,000 in certification costs, you end up only spending $250, and
Right.
$250 is still enough money to if you're selling produce at a farmer's market. But if you're selling $30 bottles of wine, that takes care of itself pretty quickly.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, and I think most people have a sense of what it means to be organic in vineyards, not adding any synthetic sprays on the vines or on the soil, not using any synthetic fertilizers, all organic, compost and things like that. But what are some of the, other than the record keeping, what about the winery? Are there any requirements of what you can and can't use or what you have to do or not do in terms of the processes?
Yes, yeah. So I mean, what it comes down to is fewer tools in the toolbox.
Okay.
Making organic wine is not as difficult as making organic grapes for sure. That
Okay.
being said, when things go wrong in the winery, I'm spinning around like Chicken Little because I don't have the background in chemistry to really understand what I'm doing to fix my problems. But
Right.
a conventional winery may have all sorts of yeast nutrients and fining aids um, to keep a fermentation going well and happy and keep the yeast from making any off aromas. We really don't have any of those things. I mean, we have a couple of yeast nutrients that are OMRI certified. We have to use organic yeast, and there aren't a lot of those out there. For anyone who's made their own beer or made their own wine, you know how much fun it is to open up the catalog and to see the 75 to 100 different strains of yeast that you can
Right.
use. And you fantasize about them like you do of the burpee seed catalog. Oh, I can't wait to use this one. But when you're making organic wine, they changed that rule in I think 2008 or 2010. Up to that point, you were allowed to use conventional wine or yeast strains. You just had to justify it, that you were doing it. But now, so says my certifier, um, organic yeasts only, and so
Okay.
there are only a handful commercially
Right.
available yeast strains. So you take away some of the artistry of winemaking just by having so few yeast strains to choose from. But I said finding agents. So like if we don't really have I'm going to speak to our particular winery because I've only ever worked for one organic winery before, and I've only ever been certified by one organic certifier. And my understanding is that certifiers don't look at all things equally, and so CCOF or Oregon TILF or some of the larger West Coast certifying agencies may allow their wineries to do things that our certifier doesn't, and vice versa. So if I say I can't do this, it's just our experience, and someone else at an organic winery in California might say, "Well, I can do this just fine." So I am not an expert. I only know what we are allowed or not allowed to do by our certifier. Okay. Um,
Right.
so finding agents, really the only thing that we can use is like bentonite, which is
Right.
a clay. Um,
Right. And pretty intense too, from what I understand.
what
I
bentonite?
haven't personally worked with it, but
I mean, the worst thing that can happen is it can strip flavor. But it's you wouldn't
right.
use very much of it. It's used to settle some of the turbidity out of wine. When you cold stabilize wine, you may or may not, depending on your level of protein, choose to add bentonite to help make your wine protein stable. Because you can't
Right.
filter out protein instability, or at least I can't. I don't have the right filter for it. But
Is
so
filtering allowed as an organic winery?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, mechanical removal of bacteria and yeast is awesome because it means you
That's
don't have
wild.
to use,
Okay,
a sulfite or whatnot to keep it under control. So we
because that's one
actually
of the big things, right? The sulfite levels are one of the things that is across the board. I think like under 100 if you want to say made with organic grapes, and what is it, like under 15 if you want to say organic wine parts per
right.
million.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that right?
You're super close, right? So less than 100 parts per
Okay.
million if you're going to do the made with organic grapes label, and that's of yeah. So the code reads in a way that suggests that they didn't understand when they wrote it what total sulfite meant. I'm
uh,
the because total SO2 is different than free SO2. Total SO2 is
right.
actually a lab number. So it talks in the code, in the NOP code, about total sulfite, but it's not clear if it's total sulfite or total sulfite added. Um, so we're
uh
taking the more conservative approach and are assuming it's total sulfite added, which means that it's more restrictive than if
right,
because
because there's
you
already
could
some existing sulfites in the wine, which
correct,
will
but
bump.
the sulfite gets bound up and it doesn't
Right.
all like you can add 100 parts per million of sulfite, and by the time you bottle, it only shows 65
5. Yeah.
total and maybe 20 free. So if
Right.
you just went by this lab number of total, you could possibly cheat the code. So we
Got it.
consider total added, and that seems more restrictive and more in the spirit of the way the code was written. So
Got it. Yeah.
um, yeah, so if it has the USDA organic logo, then no sulfite was added whatsoever.
Got it.
Okay, so
Okay.
it's not 10, it's not 15. Now that 10 ppm number is important on the back label where it says contains sulfites. So if you are making a conventional wine but you don't add any sulfite, um, you don't have to put contains sulfites on the label, unless the when you bottle it, the sulfite, the free sulfite is 10 ppm or more, right? Um,
Right.
Maybe it's not free, maybe it's the total. Anyway, it's irrelevant. The So we've made wine without sulfite before, but the naturally occurring sulfite was in excess of 10 parts per million. So,
So you can't.
well, we went around in circles with TTB on this, and it really is tiring to be like the first time that someone encounters something. Like
Right.
not like being a pioneer. It's just like being a first. And so I mean, I can't imagine we're the only one, but maybe this particular TTB reviewer had not dealt with it before, and they were denying the organic labeling because the not be made with organic grapes, but the actual USDA organic logo, because our naturally occurring sulfite was in excess of 10. So after we went around on it, we compromised and we put contains naturally occurring sulfites on the back label, which I think I've seen in other organic wines before. So
Right.
that satisfied that TTB reviewer.
Got it. And speaking of your label, you list ingredients, I noticed, which I love that you do that. Is that a requirement of certification, or is that just something you do voluntarily?
Yeah, it is a requirement of our certifier. Um,
Okay.
I've noticed that other organic wines don't have to have the ingredient list on labels.
No, you're
Um,
just the lucky one.
well, again, like it said, this is what our certifier tells us we have to do, so we do it.
Right.
I've sent them images of other organic wines from this country that don't have ingredients lists, and they say it's irrelevant. This is what you have to do. So that's why we have an ingredients list on the label. I mean, it's clunky looking. I would prefer the label to be cleaner, but
Uh-huh.
there aren't many things on the ingredients list, so it doesn't take up that much space.
Right.
um, yeah, and what's really funny is that there is wine consists, depends on whether it's red or white, but wine consists of like 99.9 something percent grapes. And so
Right.
if you look at an ingredients list on any kind of wine, even conventional wine is not going to have much other than maybe grapes, sugar, sulfite, and what else would be there? Maybe like tannins or something. The flavors from tannins, because most of these things that a winery uses, whether organic or conventional, they don't end up in the wine. That's the whole point of having a fining agent. It does its job. It falls to the bottom of the tank or the bottom of the barrel, and then you rack off it. I'm sure there are trace
Right.
things, but like the whole point is to leave that fining agent behind. And so an ingredients list is actually only supposed to, again, this is our understanding from our certifier, is only supposed to capture the ingredients and not your fining agents, or what
Oh.
the certifier calls processing aids.
Oh,
Um,
that's weird.
yeah, so like
Okay.
if you look at you look at a box of like organic cookies, everything on the cookie, everything on the ingredients list are things like oats and sugar and wheat or whatever,
Right.
flour. All those things you put in, you stir it up, you bake it, and it's still there. But there are a number of products, including wine, where you add things and then you take things away. And
Right.
so those are not considered ingredients, so they don't end up in the ingredients list. So
Hmm.
even if you have a conventional vineyard that or a conventional winery that has an ingredients list, they may be using processing aids and are not putting them on their ingredients list because they're not ingredients.
Right.
At least that's my understanding. I have lived super limited experience since I've only ever made wine for one winery.
Right. Well, I mean, nobody has to put ingredients on if you're conventional anyway. And most people don't. I'm a big proponent of ingredients labeling. That's why I was excited to see you guys had it. But I believe everybody should be required to list everything that was added during winemaking, like anything, any human ingredient in and anything that was a result of human intervention that was added at all during the process, whether trace elements result in it or in the wine, in the finished wine. I think it's more about it shows what a winemaker is willing to do. I'm kind of going on a tangent here, so you
No, no,
can
please
correct
do.
me. But yeah, I think because it tells the story. It tells like the kind of values that the winemaker has. It tells like what was thought to be okay to be added, and I think that's all really important. I think and a lot of people aren't going to know the difference, but a lot of wine enthusiasts will know the difference. You'll be able to tell like, oh, this person is doing a complete, like, you don't even need a natural certification. You can just tell, like, if they just have grapes as the only ingredient and they've been required to list everything that they use, you're like, well, this is a natural wine basically. Like, or organic grapes or something, um versus wondering because there's no ingredients listed, like, well, what kind of wine is this, anyway. That's my tangent. I would love to see that become a requirement. um but I love that you guys are doing it anyway in the part that you're doing it. um i I want to now dig into some of the juicy elements of what it's like to be an organic winery and wine grower, or just any kind of grape grower on the East Coast. What have you had to deal with? What are some of the challenges that you faced? You know, and be graphic.
Yeah. Graphic, but without curse words, right? Not graphic
Sure.
language.
Well,
Yeah.
it's okay. Whatever you want to do. If it requires it, it requires it.
This is a family show. Yeah. So, not surprising, the weather. I mean, it's the it's what every farmer needs to have, and it's the challenge that every farmer deals with. Is um, it's rain when you don't want it, or not enough rain. In the Mid Atlantic, it's usually too much rain,
Uh-huh.
too frequent
Yeah.
rain at the wrong time of the day. Um, and because it is usually hot and humid and rainy in Virginia, or for any of the other mid-Atlantic states. We tend to have more fungal pathogens. Um, uh, I don't know that this is true, but the one of the things that was explained to me early on was that the mid-Atlantic of the United States is one of the most biologically diverse places in the world. It's one of those things that
Yeah.
people say to make themselves feel better. It might be somewhat true. Maybe we're top 100.
Yeah.
But there are really there's a dozen of major grapevine fungal pathogens that we have to deal with.
Wow.
And if you are spraying Chardonnay conventionally, you have probably the same kind of disease pressure than if you're spraying my hybrids with organic sprays. It's like they are like Chardonnay or any of the Vitis vinifera. They just don't have much of an immune response to pathogen attack, right? And so you have
Right.
to spray these conventional materials, these fungicides that work really, really well, but you have to spray them if you're spraying Vitis or you're growing Vitis vinifera. And so uh, folks like you might think, oh, it must be super hard to be organic in Virginia, and it is.
Can you
But I'm
repeat that again? You did cut out there. You say folks like me might think, and then it kind of picks it
yeah,
apart.
that it's difficult to be organic in Virginia, and it is. I imagine it's also really difficult to be conventional vinifera vineyard in Virginia. Um, it's no joke, because those vines don't do anything for them except make beautiful grapes. But they don't provide any help. The varieties that we grow, they put up a decent fight, against
Right.
the spores that land on their leaves or land on the grapes. Um, and so what we don't grow any varieties that don't have a good immune response to black rot, um, downy mildew, powdery mildew, anthracnose, phomopsis, the late season rots. Yeah, I mean, we pick varieties that have good general disease resistance, and that's how we are able. That's one of the three legs of our stool. Like a sitting stool. Um, that the varieties that we grow have to stick up for themselves because honestly, we're not spraying anything on them that actually works. It doesn't have the efficacy that a conventional grower would expect. A conventional
Right.
grower is going to spray something for black rot and know it's going to have 99% efficacy. Like
Right.
I'd be lucky if anything that I spray has 20% efficacy.
And
So
it's you described it when we've talked in the past as you only have prophylactic options versus systemic or uh, suicidal or options. What are that's not the word. I'm making that up as a joke, but uh, essentially you're just preventative basically. And if something goes wrong, you don't really have a tool that knocks it out other than just cutting it out literally
yeah,
and manually.
yeah, yeah. So you're talking about systemics and conventional sprays will get into the vascular system of the vine and will fight the disease from the inside out. That would be awesome, but we don't have anything like that. And then the
Right.
other one I think you're referring to is something that has it's like kickback. So like if a spore lands on a leaf and infects the leaf, then you spray it and then it kills. Again,
Right.
so after the infection has happened, and we don't have
Right.
anything like that in organic. There are some like oxidizers, like something that is made like baking soda or something that's made like hydrogen peroxide that is supposed to have some sort of it's supposed to like fry the disease if it's out on the surface, but most of the diseases, as soon as they get into the leaf immediately, so they
Got it.
are protected from these like surface sprays. But yeah,
Right.
prophylactic sprays are really all we have. Um, and none of them work well enough to rely on them exclusively. So we are paying attention to the weather. We know generally what kind of disease that we will see in a certain number of days after an overnight rain event, and then we'll set the calendar for it, and then that that morning we'll go out and start looking for leaves or looking for berries, and when we see it, we take it out of there. I mean,
Right.
sanitation. If so, so I said there are three legs to our stool. One is
Yeah.
disease resistant varieties. The other is sanitation. And if we don't go out there and pick out disease, despite everything that we're doing, of course we're going to get disease because it's the Mid Atlantic. Um, but if we can grab bad leaves or bad berries or eventually bad clusters and get them out, then we can push the development of the disease further down the season, and eventually the clusters will be immune to the various diseases. Black rot is the variety that is most problematic for organic in Virginia. But after 5-6 weeks after bloom, the leaf or the berries are immune to black rot. So if we can just prevent an
Okay.
infection for a month and a half after bloom, then we're golden. And so that's what we get out
Okay.
there. We work really hard. It's usually until about veraison. When the grapes
Right.
start to change color, that's when we know, hey, we're sort of out of the woods with black rot. We don't have to be quite so zealous with our disease removal.
Karl wrote to me after this interview because he wanted to clear up something that he oversimplified in this moment. He did correctly say that the vines are susceptible to black rot for only 5 to 6 weeks after bloom. But then he made the implication that he doesn't feel safe about black rot until veraison, which is much longer than 5 to 6 weeks after bloom. That's his way of oversimplifying for the sake of being conservative and protective of the vines. He just wanted to clear that up. He was not suggesting that it was 5 to 6 weeks from bloom to veraison. And so I just wanted to insert that here for clarity. So you mentioned two of the three. So you're talking about selecting the right variety of grape, being very clean and sanitizing any kind of infection that gets into the vineyard, removing it. And then what's the third?
Canopy management. So,
Okay.
shoot positioning, leaf pulling, lateral pulling. Um, yeah, I mean the thinner and more airy. So a canopy for maybe folks who aren't in the industry. That's that wall of leaves. That provides all the energy for ripening the
Right.
grapes, right? It depends on your training system, but if you have like a bush vine, it is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a bush and shoots go everywhere. But most modern viticulture has this combination of metal and wood trellis that the vines grow on. Um, for an efficiency and management standpoint, you can take care of your vines a particular way. And so, but when everyone closes their eyes and they think of a vineyard, they think of these lines of green. That's those lines are the canopy, that wall of leaves. And if you
Right.
have a nice thin, open, airy canopy, it doesn't trap humidity. When you get rains, it dries out quickly. If it's a dense, super dense canopy, you could get a rain and it not dry out for a couple of days, and that entire
Right.
time spores are being spread, right? So,
Right.
um, also, if you have pretty good canopy management, you're able to do things like pull leaves in the fruit zone and uncover all of your fruit. Again,
Can you
so that
repeat that? You're able to pull.
you pull the leaves in the fruit zone. So if you
Got
have
it.
all of your particularly if it's vertical shoot positioning, which is fairly common. It's again what everyone thinks of when they close their eyes to think of grapevines, where the shoots sort of start at around belt height and they go up, and the shoots and the clusters are just sort of hanging there, all in like a band. Um,
Right.
and so if you have this fruit zone that is in just one little area, then you can manipulate that fruit zone in a way that um, does not detract from the overall canopy. So you pull leaves, uncovering all the fruit. Um, you don't have to, particularly you may not want to affect your juice chemistry that way. But for us, it's a given. Like, because the varieties themselves only do a certain percent of the job of disease resistance, and the sprays that we use only do another small percentage. And what I say, sanitation that kicks the ball down the road, or kicks the can down the road a little while. The canopy management also gives us another few percent of disease control. So
Right.
in the end, we have fruit. You just get out there every day. You do everything that you can think of. You hope you get lucky um, with the weather, and at the end of the season, you have fruit, and you just sort of scratch your head and go, "I can't believe we did it again." Yeah.
And I imagine that since since the fungus and molds and things that are attacking the vines thrive in those sort of dark, closed, not airy spaces, so you want to open up the canopy, the varieties of grapes that you want would be looser clusters, I imagine. Anything like Pinot Noir or any like tight bunch clusters would be nightmares for mildew in those conditions, I imagine.
Yeah, yeah. So our variety selection, there is a 4-stage process, and it's it. So we've grown 6 different production varieties. We're down to 3 now, and we've trialed 50 plus different trial varieties. Um,
Wow.
well, it sounds like
When you
it's not
say
like we planted a half acre of something. Like we'll put in like a bundle or two of something, which is like
right,
25 or 50 vines, and grow them for a few years. And so it might be that after one season or within a couple of months, it's clear that something's not going to work. So it's 50 sounds impressive, but it really isn't. It's every year we pull out trial varieties, and so I think this year we put in six or seven different trial varieties on a row, just to give it a whirl and see what we could get from it.
and
Um,
these are all new. You're not like so you're talking like you're now into the over 50 different varieties of grapes that you've tested.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Okay.
field tests. So
Right.
a scientist would bristle at uh, how with the lack of control that we have. We're just essentially putting it in the ground, taking care of it the way that we take care of the varieties that we grow, and just answer one question: is it as good or better or worse than the varieties we already grow?
Right.
And is it worth growing more of? And we
Right.
have a little bit more space left in the field where we can put in another variety or two of production varieties, and we're just waiting for something to wow me. Um, we have a 4-stage criteria for picking new varieties to even trial, not to plant an acre in the ground, but to actually just put in the ground to test. The first is disease resistance, general disease resistance, but most specifically black rot, and then
Right.
secondarily downy. Downy will take your leaves, black rot will take your fruit. If they're
Got
super
it.
susceptible to either of them, it's pointless for me to even try it. The second is what you were alluding to is cluster architecture. It's
Gotcha.
if it's a super tight cluster, it's pointless for me to try to grow it because I know it's not going to work late in the season for us. So obviously we wouldn't grow Pinot Noir because it's vinifera or Zinfandel or anything like that. But um, there are some hybrids like vignoles. I don't know if anyone out there knows what vignoles is, but it's a white variety. Um,
Yeah.
uh, it has a super tight cluster. It's supposed to be pretty disease resistant, but I'm not going to grow it. Let's see.
Right.
The third is the vine can't be phytotoxic to copper or sulfur. So
Mm-hmm.
copper is one of the elemental sprays that we can use to control or try to control black rot or downy. And sulfur is an elemental spray that is pretty decent at controlling powdery mildew. Um, and we don't have many things that actually work. So to have varieties that we can't actually spray these things that work okay, it seems sort of pointless to grow a variety that I'm going to burn the leaves off if I try to use something.
Right.
And the last one is wine style. And I know it's where a lot of people start. Like, what kind of wine do I want to make? But
Right.
in the
Right.
end, if I don't have leaves and I don't have fruit, it's irrelevant as to what kind of style of wine the grapes make.
Right.
So wine style that um, precludes our picking things like Norton. I don't know if are you familiar with Cynthiana, otherwise known as Norton?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I know it. I probably tasted it too.
yeah,
I'm from Pennsylvania, so I've tasted some funky stuff for sure. Some less. I shouldn't say funky. Some esoteric grapes.
yeah. Well, Norton is considered a Virginia grape. It's one of those like natural hybrids. If there's such a thing. It's been around forever. It makes a kind of wine that I don't care for, and so
Hmm.
that precludes our planting Norton. I mean,
Yeah.
I could ding it on phytotoxicity to sulfur. I could ding it
Uh-huh.
for tight clusters, but at any rate,
Right.
wine style is the last of the four uh,
Got
criteria.
it.
And like what we planted this year, we planted some things that I had initially, like after 40 or 50 varieties, I'm going to say I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel, right? With
Start
varieties,
going to the bench. Yeah.
varieties that I had said, well, there's no point for me to grow this. Like, I'm not going to enjoy this. So now I'm giving those a whirl, and then I have two varieties that are from um, a breeder. God, whose name escapes me now. It'll come to me. But a new grape breeder who is, I think he was working institutionally for like University of Minnesota or something, but now he's struck out on his own. And he's released a couple of varieties. One is Verona, another is Petite Pearl. Um, and I encountered
Verona
those
and no, just
Petite
repeating those names. Verona and Petite Pearl.
Pearl. Yeah. Um, the name Tom Plocker, but I think he's the guy who turned me on to this breeder. So forgive me for not remembering. I knew that it was in my head a couple months ago, but um, yeah. So
And so are you the guinea pig for these varieties? Like, are you
no,
the
no, no. They're
Okay.
commercially available, and there are a lot of folks that are
Okay.
planting up in Upper Midwest and in the Northeast. There's this organic vineyard um, in Vermont, so Montpelier Vineyards. Um, is a certified organic vineyard, one of the three on the East Coast, and he grows a couple, maybe it is Tom Plucker, varieties, um, Verona and Petite Pearl, and I tasted his wines and said, I could do something with this.
Oh,
So just
nice.
because he's able to grow them organically in Vermont doesn't mean we can do it in Virginia. So we actually have to get them in the ground and see how they do.
Um, just a quick question in terms of you were talking about the canopy and pruning. Are you cane pruning versus spur pruning? I would imagine that would be smart considering you.
Yeah, yeah. So we've moved everything in the vineyard over to canes. We
Okay.
initially were assuming that we would need cordons and spurs in order to. Um, yeah, it's complicated, man. So
Like to be able to
we
hack something off when it goes bad.
no. So like the vineyard is like a system, right? And there are all these things
Yeah.
that are interrelated, and you make a decision over on one side and it affects everything else. And so like how you design your
Sure.
vineyard is you don't just like say, well, I'm going to do this over here. There's this cascade of decision making, right? And so we knew that we weren't going to spray herbicide. And so if you're not going to spray
Right.
herbicide, that means that you're going to have native vegetation growing up under the vines, which means then that the native vegetation is going to be competing for water and resources from your vines. And so um, You don't want to use a low vigor rootstock because you need the vine to grow vegetatively, to grow with enough like oomph, with enough vigor, to be able to compete with
Hmm.
this native vegetation. So if we knew we were going to have to encourage the super vegetative growth, we had to choose those kind of rootstocks. And our thought was
Got it.
initially that if we had the vines planted really close together, which you have to do if you are going to cane prune, then we would be making a jungly mess. So we planted our vines initially 6 feet apart. Um, that's too far apart for cane pruning. So I thought we were going to have to do cordons and spurs in order to have the vines, um, give them enough space so they have enough shoots so that they can grow vegetatively and not be all on top of each other. And as we were getting into it and we were talking with various folks in the know, they were encouraging us to get away from cordons because of the potential for overwintering of disease inoculum and carrying over diseases year after year after year, as opposed to canes where you're laying down fresh wood on that fruiting wire every single season. And so, again, sort of like canopy management and sanitation, we are stacking the deck in our favor by cane pruning. But it because the system was set up for vines at 6 feet apart. Now, everything that we've planted since the initial planting, we planted at 4 feet apart, which is great for canes. Um, but those vines that are 6 feet apart, they are struggling to either fill the trellis, or we are now limiting the vines to having so few shoots that each shoot is growing well beyond the point of balance for the vine. So
Got it.
it would have been nice if we had set that up in the beginning for canes, but I really don't. I honestly don't know.
Uh-huh.
I mean, at some point, the vines should get old and settle down. Like they're,
Right.
12 years old now. So if we can get the vineyard to like the vines are 20 years old, they might actually like settle into middle age, and maybe we could cruise for another couple of decades without them like
Nice.
because I mean, baby vines are they are eager to please. They're impetuous. They don't ripen the fruit like in any way that winemakers really want them. Like the chemistry is just out of whack. They just
Right.
so eager to prove themselves. And the vegetative growth is just like it's so unnecessary. It's like they're teenagers, right? And so if we can just
Right.
get them to the point where they don't think that they have to prove anything anymore, and they're just in a rhythm. If such a
Yeah.
thing is possible, in Virginia being organic, I don't know
Right.
because there is so much variable. There are so many variables, and the weather is like this. I don't know. Maybe it's a common thing for every growing region, but the thing that we say in Virginia is, typical Virginia, insert word here, typical Virginia spring, typical Virginia summer,
Right.
atypical, because we have no idea what our growing season is going to be like. Like last year, we
Right.
had 10 days of rain the entire growing season. And that may sound familiar to you out west, but 10 days
Right.
of rain, like there were just about all farmers, apart from grape growers, were pulling their hair out last year because they couldn't figure out how to water their fields. Like no one was
Oh
able to,
yeah.
like to cut hay last year because it was just so hot
Wow.
and dry. Whereas the year
Wow.
before we had like 10 days of sunshine in 2018. And so to have such opposite seasons
Yeah,
consecutively.
didn't you get something like over 100 inches of rain during the growing season alone in 2018?
Yeah, yeah, it was it
That's
was it was
insane.
outrageous. We averaged something like 45 inches of rain annually in our area, and we had over 100, but it wasn't like 150. It was like 105. It was
Right.
somewhere close to 100. So um, I just 100 is more than double. It's enough.
Yes.
Um,
And then 2020 came along and you had frost on Mother's Day, right?
yeah, yeah. It was the
Like a
last.
heavy frost.
Yeah, I mean, I would be reluctant to call it frost. It was 6 hours below freezing, so it was a solid freeze. Um, and so
A
everything that
freeze.
was green,
Wow.
in the whole vineyard, it was something like maybe less than 100
It was worse
shoots.
than frost.
Yeah, well,
Wow.
we've had frosts before that have, when we've had, 24-inch shoots and we've had frost and we've lost the top
Yeah.
6 inches of a shoot. So we've had frost
Right.
or freeze events that have taken anything from an insignificant portion of the shoot to the entire shoot. It just is. It's how long the temperature is below freezing and how much of it. Like we've had our trunks desuckered. You have these suckers that grow off the trunks that
Right.
every year you're going and you're rubbing off with your hands. And we've had frost desucker our trunks for us before, and we've gone out there and going, oh, well, that saves me a task. And we've had, and also you look at it and go, wow, that was really close. Um,
Right.
so the relative elevation, the what your vineyard site is in relation to the topography around you matters. And so if you're on the side of a hill, then everything just all the cold air just um, flows off like water to lower parts of the elevation.
Right.
But where we have our field is terrible relative elevation. So we're in sort of a bowl. So
Ah,
we have a frost prone site. But we did
got it.
what like a lot of folks do is we planted our vineyard where we don't have trees.
Right.
It's super
Makes sense.
convenient. Yeah, and we
Yeah.
have 15, 20 acres of forest on hills, forested hillside around us. And we could do what like a lot of other vineyards have done after 10 years or so. They've put the finances together and said, look, we're going to make excellent wine because we're going to take down trees. And you know, uh, I'm really reluctant to do that. It's
Yeah.
there's part of it is they're sequestering a lot of carbon, and I know they're gonna the trees are gonna eventually fall down at some point, and but if I clear
Yeah.
20 acres of trees and then the vineyard fails in a couple of years, I will have
Yeah.
done the damage that to our farm that it'll probably take 50 years for that forest to recover. And
Right.
I can't have that on my conscience. So since
Yeah.
I think that we aren't entirely certain that we know what we're doing, and I don't have confidence that we're going to be successful 20 years from now. I would love it, but I have to assume that um, at some point, the risk is going to catch up with us. It hasn't yet, and like it's shocking that 2018 didn't do us in. Um, but if we got a number of wet years again and again and again, maybe we wouldn't be able to overcome all of the disease that builds up. And so if we were to take down trees, um, I would feel like crap. That
Yeah.
we
Totally.
assumed that we knew what we were doing, so we would deforest part of the farm.
Right.
But
Right.
if we knew what we were doing 20 years from now, I'd say, hey, it might be an option. And then we
Right.
could get up on the slopes where frost would not be an issue.
Well, and just listening to everything you said, it sounds like there could be a fourth prong on that stool of how to make it work, and that would be site selection. I mean, based on everything you've said, it's if you had the luxury of choosing an optimal site, that would be another thing that could work in favor of organic viticulture.
Certainly, yeah. Well, there's the certainly
And
for long-term
and
sustainability.
right. And do you ever wish you had selected a site in California?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm joking. Just
So
when you go through these kind of weird years that you have, I'm just
so
imagine you might
you
daydream about the kind of conditions we have out here.
right, but you guys are hurting for water, right? I mean,
Yeah,
the grass is always greener, right? So we never have to irrigate our vineyards.
right.
We
Right.
we
That's
don't
the
have.
upside.
I mean, if we do, we just take it from groundwater. It's you probably can talk to this, and I'd love for at some point you to address this in your podcast. Is what is more long term sustainable? A vineyard on the East Coast or a vineyard on the West Coast. Because if you guys are going to be struggling for water, I don't know. You know, uh,
Yeah.
I guess it depends on where on the West Coast, right? There are certain parts where water is
Right.
at more of a premium. um, but
Right. Yeah, once you get below pretty much San Francisco, it starts to get dicey. I mean, you do really need to be extremely serious and forward looking. I mean, even north of San Francisco in certain areas, but I mean, I remember hearing interviews with Napa folks who were, during the height of the drought that we just got out of 2 years ago, and they're like, we know there's a drought, but we really basically are fine. Like Napa has its own sort of ecosystem. They get, even in drought years, they're pretty good. I mean, if it was a 20-year drought, it would be a different story. But, a 5-year drought, they're still getting plenty of water and have plenty of water. But you go inland, you go to Lodi, you go to, anywhere in the south of there, in the Central Coast, where a lot of the, where the grapes that we get come from, it is very dicey. And since you set me up, about East Coast versus West Coast, I mean, I really think, I think what you are having to do, everything that you've talked about here, just the process that you have to engage in to make things work organically, is really like a roadmap that, I think it almost makes it like there's no excuse for people not to grow organically on the West Coast, where we have so little of the pressures that you have to deal with and so many benefits other than, the lack of water, that are, just optimal for any kind of grape. I mean, we can do vinifera, but if we brought hybrids out here, we'd probably have to do nothing to them. We could just put them in and probably never spray them. I mean, powdery mildew is probably the worst thing that most vineyards have to deal with if you're clean and healthy in the vineyard.
yeah, and
Um,
I don't get powdery. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, but I think I guess what I'm saying is I see the challenges that you face, have forced you to not be as lazy or take the shortcuts that somebody out here can take, because you really just don't have the luxury. Like, it's an ongoing, I don't know, battle, but you just can never let your guard down, basically. And that has made you more creative, more resourceful. And I think, the you are replicating, I think, what probably our ancient ancestors had to do, which was like they grew things. Certain things worked, certain things didn't. They kept growing the things that worked and didn't grow the things that didn't work, versus the modern perspective, which is we can take anything we want from anywhere in the world and we can make it work because we can kill everything that competes with it, and protect it in ways. And I feel like that's not sustainable. That's not a way forward. I think that's a really short-sighted approach to viticulture or any kind of agriculture, whereas your approach is really the evolution of moving forward with viticulture. Like, and I want to ask, throw this back on you. I don't want to just go on a tangent here, but you have talked about, you know the grapes that you have now, you've suggested, are probably not the end of the line for you, that there's that this is more about a process, and that you imagine maybe 20 years, 25 years from now, you'll be growing different grapes. And I and that sounds accurate to what you've said, right? I'm not putting words in your mouth.
yeah. I
It's
mean,
more about
I'd be surprised if I'm growing the same varieties, but if I just don't
right.
know. I mean, who
And
knows? Maybe I'd be growing muscadine, 20 years from
right.
now, because it's the only thing that you can grow organically. I don't know.
I mean, I think,
Um,
I guess it seems like you've realized that the process is more important than, I like this grape, therefore I'm going to make it work. And I think what's beautiful about that is the process that you have to embrace is the process of adaptation and evolution in terms of moving viticulture forward. So I think that's why when I say East Coast versus West Coast, I see the future in what you're doing versus the kind of import vinifera, just grow a huge monoculture vinifera vineyard in California because you can and because it's easier to do, versus you are kind of the future, like the interesting things, the stories that will last and will continue on in the future. I think you're setting the stage for. So there's my pat on the back and tangent all at the same time. But do you think this process is a good model that other people should follow, whether they're conventional or not? Like, do you think this, do you think there's a strength to it that transcends just what you're doing as an organic vineyard and winery?
Yeah. I think that it is easy to take the success of your neighbor and replicate it. I think it is hard to step out of your comfort zone. I encourage all new growers, even conventional growers of vinifera, to plant some weird varieties, whether they be hybrids or vinifera. Because if all you grow is Chardonnay, then all you know is how to grow Chardonnay. You don't really know how to grow grapevines, right? That if
Right.
you are forcing yourself to do things that are uncomfortable, you'll learn more about what it is that you're doing and understand the repercussions of the decisions that you make out in the vineyard. Um, I think that the hybrids are able to make wine. Winemakers are able to make wine from hybrids that are very good. Depends on the hybrid, of course. Um,
Yeah.
you may not be able to find that Robert Parker epiphany moment from Vidal Blanc, right?
Right.
There is a certain amount of inherent beauty or potential for inherent beauty in vinifera that may not exist in hybrids. But you can make some really good wine from hybrids if you take care of them, particularly if you are not coddling them. If you are
Do you can I
exposing
can
them
I
to a lot,
can I jump?
yeah.
Good. I was just saying, do you think it's fair to say, to qualify what you just said by saying yet, like you can't necessarily achieve the same beauty as vinifera yet? Like, I mean, isn't the hybrid game very much in process?
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I guess that's kind of what I was alluding to, is that there's breeders that are still crossing things, still trying to come up with better and better varieties, and we don't know yet where that will end up. We could potentially, I mean, I think the goal, right, would be to have a hybrid that rivals, the greatest of the vinifera and in flavor and wine style, and yet is extremely resistant to all bad things that compete, in the vineyard.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, great breeding continues to strive for um, whatever the goals are. Like up to this point, it's been in the United States. It's been largely, at least on the East Coast, Northeast, Upper Midwest. It's about cold tolerance. But in
Right.
Europe, I mean, the peewee movement in Europe, um, it's maybe 3 decades old, something like that, where they are breeding grapes for disease resistance and only for disease resistance. Well, I mean, they want wine quality as well, but it's the peewee variety, like the concept is starting to spill over here into the United States. And peewee, if do you know what I'm referring to? This peewee, it's PIWI.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
It's an
I've
abbreviation
heard
for
of it.
a
I'm not a huge.
German
I
word.
can't tell you what it stands for.
Yeah, there's a German word that's like 50 letters long, and the first four letters are PIWI. And so it's just easier to say
Okay.
that. This is coming from someone who's has German in the background. Um, so
Right.
it's Eastern Europe, it's continental Europe, it's Great Britain. There are breeders that are making grapes that are trying to find the most vinifera possible, vinifera-like characteristics possible, with as much disease resistance possible, so that they can grow
Right.
grapes organically in Europe. Because it's there is less of an emphasis on sustainable viticulture in the United States, but I think it's changing, and there are more of these peewee varieties that have been made in Europe are being are finding their way into the United States, are ending up in nurseries, and are being propagated for sale. And so um, this is coinciding with there being a greater number of younger grape growers who are, pardon me, I had to step away from the computer right there.
At this point in the podcast, we were disconnected by a lightning storm. So there's a little break here. We come back together, and so we'll jump right back into it. Oops. Oh, no. And we're off and running. Well, that was exciting. I feel like I was thinking about it. I was like, it's like Mother Nature reminding us that she's in charge, which is what this whole podcast is all about. So it was kind of a nice interlude, a little lightning storm to break things up.
Yeah, we might be broken up again. There are ground strikes around us, so
Wow, that's
whatever.
exciting. Well, I know we were talking about varieties and the new peewee varieties and things like that, and I guess that'll lead me to like this question, which is, what are the challenges of marketing and selling the varieties that nobody's heard of? These non-varifera hybrids, especially there in Virginia.
Uh, yeah, I don't. We don't have a problem with our varieties being unknown or less well known. In Virginia.
Okay,
Um,
people are pretty receptive.
yeah, and I presume that this is sort of wherever you put um, whenever you label a wine in our area that doesn't have the name of the grape on it, people are pretty open minded to it. Um,
Hmm.
there are some older um, wine consumers that are very insistent on drinking their Chardonnay or their
Could you
Merlot,
repeat that? Drinking their,
their
sorry.
Chardonnay or their Merlot.
Okay, got
Um,
it.
but anyone who is under 50 is pretty open minded about, like, they don't care, particularly like
Yeah,
yeah. You have a youthful sounding voice, so I would say
I'm
folks
under
your age
50.
and younger, um, um, they don't. I mean, they really don't care. There's like, put something in front of me that I've never heard of before. That you
Yeah.
tell them the name of the grape. There's obviously no recognition in their eyes, but there's also like a sense of adventure in their eyes. Like, they just want something to taste good. It's a bonus that, like, there's a good narrative behind the wine and behind the vineyard, and they feel like they're doing something positive, like by supporting us, and like that their principles are being reflected in
They're
the
do-
wine that they choose. Um, but
I like what you just said. Could you repeat that? They're doing something, and then it cut out. They're doing something by supporting you. So I can't. I didn't hear the whole thing.
I have no idea what I said. Um,
Okay, they're doing something good by supporting you, and
yeah,
they're
yeah.
got it. Okay.
The narrative, like every wine has a story, right? And
Yeah.
the narrative of our vineyard is also the principles behind the business, right? And there's that says a bonus for them, but they really, all they want is something that tastes good, and it helps that we're friendly and that we're not like pretentious, and all that just goes along into like not growing vinifera. In our
Right.
area there are um, folks that are fairly serious about growing grapes, and they only grow vinifera, and I think they're missing out because there's at least the market that we encounter is folks who are not obsessed with the name of the grape. Um, and folks who will only plant vinifera because they think that's only real wine, I think, are really missing an opportunity. They might even be scaring away customers by insisting on
Hmm.
growing the noble varieties. Um,
Right.
there are a number of young grape growers and winemakers in Virginia. So I assume it's the same elsewhere, that are totally open minded to hybrids. They think it's silly that vinifera, that there's this insistence on growing vinifera, um,
Right.
and they're planting it. They're contacted me and said, "Hey, what varieties do you think work well for Virginia?" And I have to tell them, look, our criteria for planting grapes are different than yours, but um, and it really is encouraging that there is this swell of interest in hybrids, to the point where this last every winter, the grape growers in Virginia get together and have a 3-day conference in Charlotte. So it's the Virginia Vineyards Association, which does incredible work to help educate grape growers, but also serves to as a central point for this aggregation of resources. Um, and more than half of this 3-day meeting this last February was about new grape varieties. And so we have a president who of the VVA who is super open minded to growing hybrids, and with his leadership, I think we might see some movement in the industry where hybrids will be considered cool and not just
Yeah.
like how they have been perceived up to this point as cheap fruit, because they have disease resistance. They tend to have big clusters. They have they're where you put it's what you plant hybrids where you can't imagine planting your vinifera. You give your vinifera your best sites, but you put your hybrids wherever else. And
Right.
you don't take care of them because why would you? And well, because if they grow well, so they can't be good because they and so they don't put a lot of time and attention into them, and then the wines are lackluster. And
Right.
there are several.
So
Go ahead.
self-fulfilling, I was going to say. Sounds like.
That's what it seems like from my perspective, but again, this is just our perspective. All we grow are hybrids, and we take care of them like folks would take care of their vinifera if they had to. You know, um,
Yeah.
I mean, like um, I'm out there absolutely not babying because I don't cuddle our vines, but like we're out there picking off individual leaves and like walking by and going, oh, let me get that lateral too, and we really are giving them the TLC that we need to give them. But if anyone really treated their hybrid grapes with the love and care that they treat the vinifera, they would be shocked by the wine quality they could get out of them. And so there are folks in Virginia. There are several vineyards that just grow hybrids, and I mean I think things are starting to take hold where there's this development of plant material from outside the United States. I mentioned Tom Plocker's varieties, Verona and Petite Pearl. There is probably going to be some peewee development in the U.S. also. Um, and then there are all these private grape breeders, which are constantly um, uh, making new material that it's just like rolling the dice. Eventually, you're gonna come up with snake eyes, right? Eventually, you're gonna get
Right.
it, because it's not like super exact or pardon me, precise like gene manipulation is, right? Or you can just
Right.
flip switches on and off. Like this is every time with classical breeding, it's like you're rolling the dice every single time, and the odds are not in your favor with classical breeding. But you roll the dice enough times, and you're going to get a winner, right? Um,
Right.
and so, I mean, I have a lot of hope in the future of grape breeding. Um, but it's one of those things where I really would like someone else to do it because it requires a lot of time and a lot of space, and it's just a lot of work. I mean, the all of these commercially available hybrids, the thousands and thousands of seedlings that went into that, over 2 3 decades worth of the different stages that you need to go through before you finally like release and name a variety. I mean, that's why institutions generally are the ones that are doing it, because you require so much space and this
And
long-term funding.
time.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
um, um, yeah, I mean, like a lot of the varieties that we grow, like the year that they're released, it's 20, 30 years earlier was when that pollination happened. And you know that from the index number, and from the
Oh,
various
wow.
institution. Private breeders certainly can do it and have done it. But my faith is still in institutions because they have the big picture in mind. But most
Yeah.
of them, it's hard to get an institution. Again, I'm just talking out of my butt here. It's just from my understanding, not from firsthand experience. Is that it's hard to sell a breeding program on disease resistance because there just isn't any
Huh.
money in it. Well, I mean, how many grape growers on the East Coast are organic, right?
Or
Just a
right.
few, right? But if you
Right.
can sell cold tolerant varieties, you can sell millions of vines. You know,
Huh.
so the peewee material that's now in the U.S. Is starting to see it. It's starting to get planted, and I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on more of it, but also to see other folks try it and go, "This is every bit as good as the vinifera we have in the ground, and we don't have to spray it but half the time. Why am I growing vinifera? And I don't.
Right.
I mean, I love vinifera. I buy a lot of vinifera wine for myself. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Not
but
dissing it, but
terms of like
it,
suitability for Mid Atlantic, I wonder.
yeah, no, clearly it doesn't seem well suited. um, yeah. Uh, delicious taste. Yeah, I agree. Totally. Yeah.
So, in full
And
disclosure, have you
so
ever made wine from hybrid grapes?
have I? That's a good question. No, I don't think I. No, I don't think I have. No, I haven't because all of my winemaking has been on the West Coast, and I mean, I just can't even find any out here. I would if I could. I was just trying to remember if I had like done some weird grocery store purchase of grapes to make wine as an experiment, but no, I mean, and even that it wouldn't have been a hybrid in the way that you're talking about. But no, I don't think so. I mean, I kind of dream of one day having a vineyard, and I would love to plant a hybrid grape, at least as a trial to do exactly what you're saying, like plant it alongside some vinifera or for whatever and grow it in the same way, treat it with the same care and then, you know, see what it tastes like and see how it does in California because nobody's doing it out here. And I really think, like you said, the next generation is much more open. I would even say beyond open. I would say they're hungry for something new. Like the story. I mean, part of that unfamiliarity and the uniqueness of these grapes is part of their story, and it adds novelty. It adds a fascination element that I think a lot of people are hungry for. I mean, I think the weirder, the more popular in some circles, to the point that, I really think to a certain extent, people they don't even care, like you said, about varieties at all. They really just care about the story behind that wine. Whether, like, what was that vineyard all about? Like, why, like, how old is it? Like, why does it exist? What's the history of it? What's the backstory that led to this bottle of wine? And that is what they want to taste. I mean, they could care less what varieties it's from. They want to taste that sort of historical narrative that arrived in front of them in a glass. And I think more and more that's the case. I think more and more, especially like you said, the next generation is that's what's happening. That's what I see a lot of, especially here in Los Angeles. There's a big, I think that's one of the really positive things about the natural wine movement. But and millennials in general seem to be all about that. So it's almost easier to sell an esoteric thing with a great story than like a really delicious Pinot or Cabernet, which is just seen as pedestrian at this point.
It's all about perspective. Um,
Yeah, 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 and it does depend on the circles. I mean, the great thing is I think there's something for everybody. It's like, I don't think there's a right or wrong. Like I love wine. I love all wine. So I'm that way. Like I want to try it all. If I taste something and I love it, I really don't care. It could be a Napa Cab or a big buttery oaky Chardonnay. If I love it, I love it. Or it could be, and I want to ask you the question that the young winemakers are asking, young wine growers are asking, which is what does work, what has worked for you guys. I don't think we've named them yet in this talk. So if you want to talk about what's worked for you and what your main grapes are right now, and then maybe describe what they taste like as a finished wine.
yeah, I'm thinking because like nothing works. um,
What works? Well,
yeah,
we're still trying.
everything is flawed.
Well, I will say, I mean, let me put in a plug in for you. You very kindly and generously sent me a bottle of your white and your red, and I love them both. They were delicious. The white was one of my favorite whites I've had. I mean, just super refreshing. Not overly complicated, but like just delicious. Just a easy drinking, delicious, beautiful white. And the red, the same thing. Like it was just a lush, yummy red. Like could have been a red blend from the Central Coast easily, of California, that is, as opposed to the Central Coast of the East Coast. um, yeah, both really good, I thought. So if you're having problems, you still have some good things to show for your efforts,
Oh
I'd
yeah,
say.
but it's like in theater, like all the chaos can be behind the curtain, as long as the audience doesn't know about like how hard everything is.
Right.
Um, yeah, so the varieties that we currently grow, production varieties, I'm only down to one white variety, production variety, and that's Cayuga White, which is a
Right.
variety released by Cornell in the mid '70s. Um, Cayuga is itself a fairly neutral variety in terms of like flavor profile, wine characteristics.
Could you, could you repeat that again? It's a fairly
Fairly neutral.
neutral.
So as opposed to like an aromatic variety, Cayuga tends to have some citrus zest. It is not opulent in any kind of way. It's often used as like a base wine, particularly up in like Ohio and New York State, where you can then put like a small percent of something with a little more fruitiness, like Niagara or something like that. But Cayuga for us is proven to be very malleable. We use it for a dry Germanic style wine like the one that you've tasted.
Mhm.
Sweeter
I thought
Germanic.
that was great. Really liked. I mean, and I shared it with we had a tasting party, and it was a crowd pleaser. No joke. We had like 30 different people tried it and didn't know what it was. It was a brown bag thing, and then I revealed it, and everybody was blown away. Nobody expected anything
Hey,
in that
thanks for doing that.
universe.
That was nice. Um,
Absolutely, no, it was great.
so we've done it in barrel fermented sparkling wine. We've made from Cayuga. Um, yeah, so we've done. You can do a kind of like Chardonnay in that it is it's so flexible. You can sort of fit it into a number of different wine styles, but you
Mm.
can't make like a prosecco, or obviously, or a like a it's not going to be mistaken for a Sauv Blanc or a Gewurz or something. It's not aromatic and perfumey. But it makes a good, like, bracingly dry wine. Um, the Cayuga it's a big berry, which really scared me the first time we saw it. Well, I'd never grown it before, and I didn't know
Yeah.
anyone in Virginia that grew it. So the first year, so for comparison, right? Most of my wine grapes, the berries are like 1.5 grams. Like, I have one big berry that's like almost 2 grams of berry. I consistently get over 3 grams of berry for Cayuga. And so, like, when
Wow.
you see these grapes like get big and big, like the first year we were growing Cayuga, um, that first night I saw it and was terrified. I had dreams of harvesting grapefruit sized grapes, because I'm thinking to myself, my God, like, it's never going to end. All we need is like one cluster per vine. Um, uh, it turns, that they do stop growing, but 3 grams is a huge berry. Um, it's it's behaves. It does what you want it to do. It's disease resistant. It's really a pleasure to grow. It's fairly resistant to just about everything except for one disease that we have, called anthracnose, that has been a real challenge for us lately.
Mm.
Um, and that's it. We have other trial varieties. More white trial varieties have failed than have succeeded, but we still have one called Bianca, which is a Hungarian hybrid. That's one of those peewees. Um,
Okay.
let's see, Saint Pepin, which is another hybrid from the Upper Midwest. Um, I think that's it on white trial varieties. Oh, we got others that aren't producing yet. Things we just planted this year.
Right. Too
Um,
early to tell, I guess, on those.
yeah, and they may not make it to the fruit stage, because you grow them for a couple of years just to grow the structure of the vine, and usually by that point, if the foliage is resistant enough to see it for a third year, and then that third year, then you are going to evaluate the fruit for disease resistance. So,
Right.
um, that's sort of the process. So, yeah,
I mean,
not
that's
December.
it's important. I think it's important to underline that for people who aren't familiar with wine grape growing, that, you know, you've been through 50 plus varieties, and each one of those represents probably, you know, to really, unless it's getting succumbing before you ever get to the fruiting stage, it can be a 3 year process plus till you really get to see the whole cycle of that, because you need really 3 year or 2 years of solid vegetative growth where you pulling the grapes off to let the vine structure develop, and then the third year you can finally let grapes hang, and then you get to, you know, evaluate that like you just said. But that's like, I mean, that's a lot of time considering 50 varieties in 3 years each. You know, that's significant. I think it's important to underline that.
Yeah,
It's a
well,
really,
you
it's
have to do it.
Herculean in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm am in awe of the programs of grape breeders, but this is not super scientific. But you got to put it in the ground, and you got to wait.
Yeah.
you need
Yeah.
Because something may be disease resistant in Hungary, like this Bianca variety I mentioned.
Uh-huh.
And obviously they don't have black rot, because it's not resistant to black rot. I know that.
Uh,
Um, but I think this trial variety we've had in the ground maybe 7 years now, and every couple of years I think, oh, I'm going to get rid of it now, and I don't. Um, so
is that
sometimes
laziness
the
or
variety.
hopefulness?
Well, yeah.
Sorry.
Well, it depends on expectations, right?
Yeah.
We had one trial variety was a red variety that was released from Cornell back in, I don't know, 2011 maybe,
Is
2013.
this the is this the Arundel?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I heard, I mean, I remember reading articles and being really excited about it, and I don't usually ever hear of like new hybrid releases, so there must have been some fanfare to it. It was definitely in the press, and, you know, the word got around, and then I think that's how I discovered you. Was I called the other organic winery in Virginia that had existed up until that time, and they'd sort of banked their whole business and organic, you know, hopes on Arundel, and found out, oh, it's not resistant to black rot and maybe some other things too, and had to switch over or else lose the whole vineyard. And they said, well, you know, talk to Karl. He's actually doing it, and that's actually their referral to you was because they failed at Arundel and they sent me to you. That's how I basically found you.
Yeah, Arundel, I think, is a success story for the marketing of Cornell. I don't know if it was purposeful or if it was maybe one of the grad students was super excited and happened to know a journalist or something. But yeah, I mean, I was following it too. Like the variety was unnamed. It was out in the literature as not literature, but it was out in the ethos as existing. Its nickname was No Spray 301 because its
Right,
index number was 095.301. Blah blah blah. Right. So it was the
right.
301st seedling from 1995. Um, and yeah, I was totally excited about No Spray 301 when we finally were able to get um, uh, non-named variety from that variety from the nursery. We put it in the ground, and it was like, we don't do anything large scale. Like it's a toe in the water with everything. You have to. The variety has to impress me for several years before I'm going to put like an acre of something in. Um,
Right.
and yeah. I mean, every opportunity that variety had to disappoint me, it did. But part of it was because I went into it with just such high expectations for that
Right, right.
variety, and it got everything. And
Yeah,
it wasn't a no spray variety in Virginia. Maybe it was in New York, but it wasn't
yeah.
wasn't on our farm. And
Right.
in addition to that, when it wasn't ripe, it was offensively vegetative.
Oh,
Well, like the methoxypyrazine that you get in some
yeah.
crabs,
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
but not like bell pepper would be nice. This was like jalapeno pepper. Like it was
Ooh.
awful. So yeah, it's that. But that's what happens. And so some varieties don't make it to the fruit stage, and you get rid of them. So I can't speak for Velvet Muscat, which is another Cornell variety, or Brianna, which is probably a hybrid. If you are going to find a hybrid in California, you'll probably encounter Brianna.
Brianna.
Um,
Okay.
you might also encounter a Blanc de Bois, which is a variety that was developed for Pierce's disease resistance that's being planted in Texas. But my
Hmm.
understanding is that you guys are having some Pierce's disease issues in California.
Yeah. Yep.
So Blanc de
Seems
Bois
right.
might be planted up there for that. It's fairly neutral, like Cayuga. So to answer your question, other red varieties. So
The
we
red.
grow,
Yeah.
we grow a variety from University of Minnesota called Marquette. Um, it's
Now
really
that's one I've definitely heard of that one getting around. I've tasted Marquette from Vermont. I know people who are having a lot of great success with Marquette. I don't know that they're doing organic. I'm probably sure that they're not, but it's definitely one that seems to have pleased more people in terms of the resulting wine. It seems like it has lent itself to be happy making, to making people happy in terms of its flavor.
Oh yeah, Marquette's wonderful. I mean,
Yeah.
berries are super tiny.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
it's red flesh variety, so making a rosé from it is challenging.
Oh, it's a Tenturier, you mean?
Yeah,
Wow.
so tiny berries, you're talking like 1.25 grams. They're like blueberries or small blueberries.
Wow.
Tiny clusters. So I can't really compare them to like vinifera, but occasionally like we'll post like a picture of a handsome Marquette cluster, and someone will say, "Whoa, are you growing Petite Verdot now?" And I'm like, "No," but so I guess it's not unusual that there are other great varieties that have tiny berries, but
And
it's
I've
a real
I've
it's a
seen
real
them make
small cluster.
I was shocked, and I mean I don't know if they were chaptalizing because they didn't list ingredients, but I remember the one I had from Vermont was like 15% alcohol, and I was like, did they ripen it in Vermont to get it to 15%? I mean, maybe you can talk to that. Does it ripen early and
Uh,
give you that?
yeah, it's an early variety to break, so it's an early variety to ripen.
Okay.
So it breaks for us before anyone's Chardonnay breaks in Virginia, which
Okay.
means it's problematic for frost susceptibility.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
our frost date is mid-May, and it breaks like a month and a half before the frost date. Um, so
Wow.
so that's problematic, from a like site selection standpoint, right? But um,
Right.
no, it ripens at like 26 bricks. Um,
Wow.
and if your conditions are ideal, you can easily surpass 30. As the berries
Wow.
start to dehydrate. The first
Yeah.
year that we had our test vines in the ground, we picked at 32 bricks, and that's when like my mind just exploded because like you got to be kidding me. We're doing organic and 32 bricks. Now that creates balance issues, obviously. But if that was the only variety that we have, then we couldn't blend away the alcohol. So Marquette is a high sugar, high acid variety. So
Okay.
we're picking it. Our goal is somewhere like 25, 26 bricks. And so that'll bring us somewhere around 15 to 16% alcohol,
And
based
what is
on the conversion percentage.
what's your pH when you're picking at
Yeah,
25,
so
26?
that depends, and it has changed as the vines have gotten older. Thankfully, those young
Okay.
vines, as I said earlier, the chemistry is all wonky with young vines.
Yeah.
Um, we were struggling to get past like 3.1 in pH,
Wow.
with a TA of like 9. Um,
Sheesh. That's
and you can do something with that. With you can cold soak
yeah.
to get your pH up. We don't do cold soak
Yeah.
anymore. A malolactic fermentation, will reduce some of your acid, but not a lot. But again, we have another grape that we chose to blend down the acid, to blend down the alcohol. So the other red variety that we grow is Corona Noir, which is a Cornell release from 2006, I think. Um, and
So it's pronounced Corot, not Coret Noir.
and I don't know. I think Bruce Reich, the great breeder at Cornell, he presented at this VVA meeting we had in February, and I'm pretty sure he said Corona Noir,
Okay.
but you know
Great.
it's
Hey.
a made up word, so you can pronounce it any way you want.
No, I honestly don't know. I just in my mind have always set it in my mind as Coret Noir, but it makes a lot of sense to call it Corot Noir. Yeah. So what
So
it
that
comes in?
variety is a low sugar, low acid grape, right? And so we
Okay.
we planted varieties, and we did this for the whites too, but we've pulled the whites out. We planted varieties for the purposes of blending, and knew that any one variety was going to be imperfect. And Marquette,
Right.
had a lot of promise, but its chemistry was problematic. Like you can only do so much with a 15 or 16% alcohol red, and particularly with high acid, right? So
Yeah.
so we do make one wine that's 100% Marquette, but it's sweet, and it's aged
Uh,
in whiskey barrels. So it's like candy. It's like porty, right?
right. Yeah.
Um,
Of course.
and that works, but that's not the wine that most red wine drinkers want, right? So um, we pick Corona Noir at around 19 or 20 bricks, and it really doesn't get any. I mean, it's not going to go past 20. And at some point, the pH is going to fall off a cliff. So you really just have to like wait and wait and wait. And if you're at 3.4, you're picking tomorrow. If you don't, it's going to be 3.8 or 3.9 before you get a chance to schedule the pick.
Wow.
Um, so you blend this low sugar, so low alcohol, low acid wine with Marquette, and you get a nice balanced wine. That's what you tasted.
And are you co-fermenting or are you fermenting separately and then blending?
Fermenting separately and blending.
Okay.
They're they we're picking them 3-4 weeks apart, so it would be nice if I could put them a little closer
Oh
together,
yeah.
because I would love to take the skins, after we press off the Marquette and throw it in the Corona Noir. But the timing has only worked on that once. Um,
Right.
so
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of fun stuff you could do. You could do like the Syrah thing and blend like Marquette with like a small percentage of a white as well to do like like with the Cayuga or something to get that color and flavor boost that you get from Viognier with Syrah kind of thing. I mean, who knows if it would work, but the
we,
mind.
yeah, we haven't done it with Marquette, but we did that when we grew Vidal Blanc.
Uh-huh.
We did that with Corona Noir. We would press
Oh,
off
okay.
the Vidal. If it was like super ripe, we'd press it off and then throw it in we short vat our reds. And so we would throw it in the vats with the Corona Noir, just to try to build a little more structure in the
Oh,
wine.
nice. How was it? Was it, and what percentage were you doing that?
Oh, God, that was years ago.
Yeah, it's okay. Just curious.
Yeah, it was. I would say it was somewhere like 15 or 20% by weight. So a significant amount.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Well, what are you geeking out about right now? I imagine you have to sort of continually be learning as a wine grower in Virginia, but what's really fascinating you now? What ideas or what big ideas are you, you know, obsessing about right now?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean it's sort of triage every day.
Don't have time to get stuck on any one
Yeah,
big
well,
idea.
because it's you sort of like are moving from one potential disaster to another. Nothing is ever on schedule. You're always behind on everything. Um, I mean, if you had 100 vines, you could take care of them perfectly, but we have more than that. And so you have to unfortunately make decisions like, well, you aren't going to get shoot positioned correctly because I have to take care of this other variety. Um, you know, um,
Right.
so in the off season, that's usually when I entertain, like, oh, what new and fun and exciting things can we do? And like what I'm most excited about is new varieties, and
Yeah.
trying to, I've been like I was eagerly waiting for Arundel to get released. Like I'm waiting for a couple of these peewees that are finally over
Right.
in the U.S. There's one called Galubak, which is
Mm.
a Ukrainian variety, which is up at Washington State Clean Plant Network. It'll be a couple years before they're able to like get it to nurseries and have enough material to propagate. But I'm looking forward to that one. Um, um, and then there are others that I just can't get into this country.
Yeah.
That where I'm
Oh no.
we have one of our wine clubbers. We have a wine club. It's a force of volunteers. They work out with me in the vineyard, and one is from Ukraine. And I've been having her translate with a grape breeder out in Ukraine to try to figure out how we could possibly get material into this country, because it has to
Smuggle
go
it.
through proper channels. Um,
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't say
what
that.
would you say?
Smuggle it.
Yeah, yeah. Lacey Act violations are pretty severe, particularly when you document that you're aware of it in your podcast.
Right. Right. We'll delete this part.
um,
uh,
but yeah, like things got to go through proper channels, and it's just really hard. I mean, the whole near obliteration of the French wine industry with phylloxera made everyone take moving Vitis across international borders really seriously. Um,
fancy
and
that. Yeah.
like you can't like forget it roots. Like things can only come in as dormant cuttings, but still, like they have to come in from they have to go through proper channels. And if the material is not going to come from what would be the term? If it doesn't carry a phytosanitary certificate, like it's not coming from like a nuclear repository,
Uh-huh.
then it has to go to like one of 2 or 3 quarantine sites in the U.S. And then it has to get
Right.
microshoot tip propagated, and essentially started from scratch.
Right.
and then it has to be tested, and then it'll get released. So it's like 10 years.
Wow.
Or you can like accelerate the process by paying money, and like maybe you could have it in 5 or 7 years. So getting new material into this country is really hard, and that's why it's usually
Yeah.
nurseries that do it. Um,
Yeah.
because they can invest in it, and the nurseries they got the big picture, the long game in mind. But they have to know that people want it. So it's like it's the chicken or the egg. Um,
Oh, yeah.
and but there are a couple of nurseries, particularly on the East Coast, that we've worked with that there are that they've let me know. you know, we
Right.
we have this guy's varieties, and you're like, oh goody goody goody, when can I get them? And I was like, well, we're talking right now like 4 or 5 years from now tops, just to get like a couple of dormant cuttings to play with. So that's what I'm excited about when I look towards the future. It's what new varieties could we potentially grow that that we will be growing for the next 50 years,
Right.
or it could be that for the next 50 years we're just going to keep trying new varieties and go, well, they're not as good as what we have right now, but we won't know until
Right.
we put things in the ground.
Right. And it's I don't know if we talked about this, but the philosophy that this is based on is the idea that the plants should be self-resistant, that you're looking for something that is, well, I guess we did talk about this, but you're essentially trying through the organic process that you go through to select for the vines that can take care of themselves and don't need the sprays and everything.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I mean,
I think we did
that's
cover that.
long term sustainable on Mid Atlantic is vines you do not have to spray often, because
Right.
you know you the rain's going to come and wash off what you just sprayed.
Right.
You know, like,
It,
you really need varieties that are going to stick up for themselves. I mean,
right.
minimal intervention is understandable, but you shouldn't have to spray conventional fungicides, I think, to be able to produce grapes. I don't think that's long term sustainable.
Yeah.
In
Not
a year like 2019 where it never rained, it was easy to be an organic grape grower. It was easy to be a conventional grape grower. But in 2018, where it just rained and rained and rained, it was hard for any. I mean, there were no farmers that had a good year. Um,
right.
and how often are we going to see those? That was the worst that we've seen in the, I don't know, 10 plus years that we've been growing grapes. But I think we should build into the business model that those are going to be frequent enough. If
Right.
we can't endure 2018 twice every decade, then we've structured the farm plan wrong, I think. So, of course, this is coming from someone who lost 90% of their crop this year to frost. What farm plan accounts for that? Um, so
Oh,
I'm not really
man.
listening to my own advice.
Well, it sounds like you are equal parts optimistic, brave, and short-term memory loss, I guess. Like if you don't dwell on the bad thing that just happened, just move forward and go on, and try to forget that
Well, you got to
horrible thing.
remember enough to avoid,
Yes.
the stupid mistake you made last time. But um, I know there is something very um, refreshing about the this line of work, right? So you can take that failure, and so long as you're not accumulating disease inoculum year after year, you can use it as a learning experience, right? Um, I would hope that 50 years from now, I would know what I'm doing better. Like, I would hope that I'm a little more confident, a little less anxious about
Yeah.
farming. In fact, I would hope that at some point someone might call me a farmer, instead of just a grape grower, because I think that it suggests that you understand the system that you are working in.
Mm.
So I know. I don't know if farmer has like a pejorative term, but I see it as like the ultimate sign of like respect, because you are just like elbowing out a little part of of nature for whatever it is that you're trying to grow. Um,
It's funny you say that. I just wrote a blog article earlier a couple months ago called "Farmers Are Cool," and and it was all about like how I'd grown up. I grew up in a not too far away from where you are, just a little further north across the Mason-Dixon line, where it's all it was all sort of like farmers had that American Gothic vibe, like it was Mennonite and old German, little farms, little dairy farms and thing like that. Very very severe, very deprivation and hard work and that kind of image of farming. And because of that, I just it was considered the ag schools were the lower, the like looked down on. You would the liberal arts schools looked down on the ag schools, et cetera, all through. And then I got to where I am in my life, and I'm like, I should have been a farmer. Like I would have been happier the whole way along. Like even with all of the difficulties and everything that go along with it that you clearly are very familiar with. But yeah, there's something really rewarding about it. And I think right now we're potentially at the verge of another agricultural revolution. I mean, I think we've been doing bad agriculture for long enough, and a lot of people are catching on that there needs to be change, and a lot of people are doing it. There's just all over the place little things. I'm hearing of really cool farms that are doing really cool things all across the country. I just found out about farm in North Dakota or South Dakota today, and it's like every day I learn about a new place that's really embracing a regenerative approach, a holistic approach to agriculture, that are eschewing synthetic sprays and chemicals and are trying to look at diversity and soil science and in a whole new way so that it's sustainable in a very long-term way and self regenerating and I don't know. I think you're right there. You fit right into that pretty well. So maybe you're already a farmer and don't know it, or maybe you consider yourself a farmer. And uh, my last question to you: do you have any? Well, not my last question. My second to last question is: do you have any resources or books or things that you would recommend that have been helpful to you and educational in terms of doing what you do?
I mean, like the grape growing side of things.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
or just in general. I mean, books that have inspired you to do what you're doing, books that have helped you do what you're doing with the winery. I mean, it could be directly related to grapes, or it could be some bigger picture idea.
Yeah. So there are a lot of books that are called like the organic.
Right.
A lot of them
And you've
are
read them all.
Well, a lot of them are written for folks who live in parts of the country where it doesn't rain in the summertime, so they're not entirely relevant. They're very pretty though, and but the picture of optimism is uh, yeah.
Well,
The two books.
maybe there's an opportunity here. I mean, I think you have a really methodical way of thinking about what you're doing. You have a process that you can really outline. You might be the person that needs to write that book for the Mid-Atlantic organic farmer, since I
Yeah,
don't know that anybody else has as much information as you do at this point.
maybe when the kid's in college, and I can turn over the vineyard to someone else. So there is a book. The very first book that I was given was a Christmas present by my wife when we were kicking around the idea of planting grapes, and so she actually got sort of the whole thing started. So it's called The Organic Grape Grower, and it's authored by the late Ron Lombau. I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. It is a fantastic introductory guide to grape growing and all things organic. And so I think he had a vineyard in Oregon, a small vineyard, and he was a collector of grape varieties as well. So he's got a lot of information about weird varieties and this and that. And that was a super easily digestible book. Um, I can't tell you who the name of the publisher was, but it's called The Organic Grape Grower, and it may not be in print anymore because he passed over a decade ago. But if someone
I feel
wants,
like I've heard it. I've heard of it. I'm pretty sure.
I know other people who have mentioned it to me, so I know enough people have purchased it in the past. But it's great. It's got pictures, and he's a good writer, so that everything is very clear. Um, in terms of what's relevant for Mid Atlantic or East Coast, Dr. Tony Wolfe, who is the head of viticulture at Virginia Tech, particularly the research arm. He has so many titles, so I'm not going to let everyone know how impressive and important and influential he has been, but he is the head of Virginia Tech viticulture at the very least.
Right.
And
Does he
he
have does he have like a blog or publications or anything? Does he have a
Oh,
bunch of
certainly.
stuff?
Yeah, yeah. So the thing that I'm gonna refer to is this. It's a handbook for grape growing on the East Coast, and I don't know the exact name of
Okay.
it, but it's a, uh collection of articles on everything from site selection to insects to diseases. It's spiral bound. It is the Bible for anyone that is growing grapes in Virginia.
Okay.
And let me take a moment to mention that the reason that Virginia grape growing is what it is largely due to two Virginia Tech professors. One is Dr. Wolf, and he's been doing this for maybe 40 years now. He came out of Cornell program, was trained up there, but he basically has taken. All right, let me take a step back. Right, so if you learn how to grow grapes in another state or another country, it takes you a better part of a decade to figure out what you just learned is relevant to this new region that you're in. Right,
Right.
but they're producing information about Virginia grape growing, in-house
Right.
research, training folks. And so there isn't this learning curve anymore. Folks are hitting the ground knowing exactly what to do. And so through leadership of Virginia Tech um, and Virginia Tech Extension, the amount of support that grape growers get is phenomenal. And then the other person would be the now mostly retired. Oh goodness, Bruce. What's Bruce's last name?
Karl emailed me later to let me know Dr. Bruce's last name is Zoeklin, Zoeklein. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but there you go.
It'll occur to me. But he's the head of Virginia Tech Enology, or was. He's mostly retired now. And so from the other side of the same
Okay.
coin, like
Got
taking
it.
Virginia fruit and producing it instead of having a winemaker learn elsewhere and then trying to figure out what are we going to do with these Virginia grapes and with the chemistry and so the Virginia Tech is the reason why grape growing has come as far as it has in the last 20 or 30 years in Virginia, and we certainly wouldn't be anywhere without their resources and without their support and interest. I mean, we're sort of like oddballs. Like everyone wants to know how the organic vineyard is doing. So every once in a while, someone will check and say, "Hey, are you guys still there?" Yes, we still exist. Um,
Well, if you say that long enough, pretty soon they're going to start coming to you for advice. I have a feeling.
well, all I can do
I'm
is tell them to not do it. I mean, you asked at some point today what like would I recommend that someone do this, and no, I can't. I mean, like there is no template for success. There is no like, oh yeah, we've been growing grapes for 30 years. All you have to do is do it this way. Um, you know, I would love for there to be more organic vineyards in Virginia. I would love to buy fruit, organic fruit from someone. But I
Yeah.
can, in good conscience, recommend that someone go out and do it because I don't know that it's going to be successful. I mean, it's really, really hard, and you
Yeah.
can't just like grow grapes from a tractor. You have to get out there and touch your vines every single day. And
Right.
there isn't a large window for error. It's it's brutal. Like if you miss something, you get punished. And so I would
Yeah.
love for to recommend that folks plant organic grapes in Virginia, but I can't in good conscience say it's a good idea. And so that's usually what I do when someone reaches out and say, "Hey, I just want to know." Um, you know, they'll say something like, sometimes they say, like, "We just put in 5 acres of Chardonnay. We want to take care of it organically. How do we do it?" And then I have to be the bearer of bad news and say, "Well, I mean, you made that decision about how you're going to take care of your grapes when you ordered your vines." Um,
Right.
but if someone wants to grow grapes organically in the, like real organic, not just like
Right.
organic so that you can like tell your customers you're sustainable, but like hold your nose to it and get yourself certified, and then there's no wiggle room to get out of it again. If someone wants to do that, like I'm more than happy. Like if they drink the Kool-Aid, I'll go and do it with them. But I don't want to be held accountable for someone losing their retirement. Because they said, "Well, Karl said it was easy." Uh,
Well, that sounds like a really good segue into me asking for you to, how can people get in touch with you, and how can they learn more about Loving Cup and get some of your wine to taste?
yeah, well, we got a website like everybody else.
All right. That's
Lovingcupwine.com. It's got pretty pictures,
lovingcupwine.com.
uh,
Yeah.
and you can order wine. And there's I wrote it, like the content, so like I know it's accurate. And it's got a lot of nerdy info in it. Lots of pictures of insects if you like insects, um, because like insects are everything.
Yeah.
Like we if we didn't have spiders and lacewings and ladybugs and all those beneficial insects, like we wouldn't have grapes, right? So
Right.
kind of obsessed about insects, which is weird that we haven't talked about it until now. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so there's all sorts of information on our website, and you can order wine, and we can ship it to. I think we're up to like 16 or so states. So
Great.
California is one of them, although there are a few more hoops that you have to jump through if you're shipping to California.
Okay.
But that information is on the website how to do it.
Okay. Great. Love it. Well, Karl, I can't thank you enough. It was a true pleasure, and I really congratulate you on what you're doing, and I hope you don't stop doing it. So thanks for doing this.
Well,
And
thanks for your
I hope
interest, Adam.
absolutely. I hope it inspires more people to be a little crazy and give it a try. um and know that there's somebody out there trailblazing who they might be able to turn to for advice, or at least commiseration
Yeah, I
when it
mean,
comes
if
to
anyone is growing organically east of the Rockies, they should reach out because I need to
it.
know who's in the club. It's
Right.
because we can always share successes and failures, and we're all like trying to get to the same place. But if we can pool information, like you could save me a decade of spinning my wheels on something.
Yeah.
So, yeah. If anyone's doing it or wants to do it, they should reach out.
I love it. Great. Well, thanks again, and we'll talk again soon, I hope.
All right, Adam. It was my pleasure. Bye bye.